Hello, and welcome to the Go-To Educator training, a mental health literacy approach. My name is Erin Wojcik, and I am the Mental Health Capacity Building Coordinator for Light of Christ School Division and Living Sky School Division. This presentation has no graphic images. However, the content of this presentation is very sensitive in nature. Many of you will have personal and family experiences of mental illness and may have been impacted by a suicide. I acknowledge this and I encourage you to reach out to your support systems if you need to take breaks along this training as well. I will also provide my email and phone number at the end of the presentation if you would like to reach out to me as well. The Go-To Educator training has been developed by Dr. Kuchar, Dr. Way, and Andrew Baxter. It is out of Alberta Health Services, and I do have permission to share this with you. So literacy is the foundation. A mental health literacy approach is evidence-based, and all other promotion, prevention, and intervention rest atop this solid mental health literacy base. If the base is not stable, the other blocks fall. Just like health literacy, the more people know about their condition, the better they are able to make informed choices. In the next video, Andrew explains how mental health literacy can be put into context for teachers. I'd like to add that the playback for this video is a little loud on computers, so please turn down your audio a little bit just so you don't get blasted by it.
Have you ever wondered how to best address student mental health needs at school? Simple, by doing what schools do best, developing literacy. Mental health literacy is different from just raising awareness, and it isn't a special day or a presentation to students about anxiety or depression. Good mental health literacy happens when students learn about maintaining their mental health, reducing stigma, understanding mental disorders and their treatments, and how to get help if they need it. The good news is that mental health literacy can be taught just like any other subject. Just like we can teach literacy, numeracy, and physical literacy, we can teach mental health literacy. Students can use this skill in their own lives, with their family, and their friends. Since 2008, teenmentalhealth.org has been developing mental health literacy lessons and materials for students, teachers, and parents. These materials have been shown to improve student knowledge, reduce stigma regarding mental illness, and improve their ability to get help. Mental health literacy is the foundation for prevention, health promotion, and treatments and care. It's the first step in developing mental health and getting students who need help to help. For more information, check out teenmentalhealth.org.
So the role of a teacher in regards to mental health literacy is to offer support, not counseling or therapy. So I'd like you to take a moment and just explore to yourself the internal capacity of your school, and before you look at external resources. So the role of you is to teach and promote student mental health literacy, recognize potential problems, refer appropriately, linking within the school, work supportively in the classroom and with other professionals. And again, it's not to prescribe or suggest specific treatments, but just know where to find out about treatments. The role of the go-to educator is the same as the teacher. It's to offer support, not counseling, and to explore the capacity within the school. But the go-to educator has a higher level of contextualized mental health knowledge to the school setting, and it's who students know who to turn to in regards to concerns. It doesn't have to be advertised, they just know and are directed to go to those teachers or staff members. It links students to appropriate resources, provides ongoing support as part of the team, and may be a designated link to health or mental health providers in the community. So it's important to note that the go-to educator is not to diagnose. You should be not using diagnostic labels to focus on recording descriptions as much detail as possible, and describe what you see without diagnosing and remain as objective as possible. You can refer to a specialist without diagnosing. So I'd like to give you an example of this. Instead of saying, James is depressed and needs therapy, record something like this. James has missed more school days before Christmas than he did the entire year last year. He appears sleepy, his clothes are wrinkly. James did not try out for the basketball team, even though he was a key player last year. There appears to be tension between James and his parents when he is dropped off at school in the morning. When I expressed concern to James, he shrugged and mumbled, "Nothing matters anyway." This type of description would give the consulting therapist more to work from. The pathway through care. The pathway through care starts with awareness, but it is not sufficient alone. Literacy is beyond awareness. It's being able to make a more informed decision. Then individuals must navigate supports and have informed conversations with care providers. Remember that students return to school or are in school while receiving care. So what is mental health literacy? When I say mental health literacy, what comes to mind? Mental health literacy is a very strong independent factor in improving health outcomes of populations and people. It's ideally taught in schools. Compared to clinicians and doctors, educators have valuable contextual information. They get to see students across multiple settings and demands, like math versus PE class, and unlike parents, have a large sample size of students to compare any individual to. So there are 4 components to mental health literacy. Number 1 is to understand how to obtain and maintain good mental health. Understand and identify mental disorders and their treatments, decrease stigma, and enhance self-seeking efficacy. So I'd like you to think about what you're already doing a good job at and where you can see room for improvement. Some of you may say that you're doing a good job with reducing stigma, while others may comment that there's still far to go. One way to reduce stigma is to use correct terms when talking about mental health and mental illness. Enhanced self-seeking efficacy means know where to go, know when to go, know what to expect when you get there. Know how to increase likelihood of best available care. So, who needs mental health literacy? Students, teachers, student service providers, other school support staff, school administrators, health providers, parents, media, and the wider community. All the words on this slide has been pulled out of academic literature and government documents to describe mental disorders. This slide demonstrates how much confusion there is around the topic of mental health and mental disorders. By calling mental illness or disorder anything else will perpetuate stigma. So I'd like you to take a moment and just have a really good look at this slide. You'll see on the top right-hand corner that there's survey results and actual prevalence. So the survey results are point to self-reports. So it is was conducted in the UK, but there are many similar surveys conducted this way in Canada. It highlights the need for better mental health literacy because respondents have a tendency to over-pathologize their reported mental health. So you can see that it is much higher for those self-reports than the actual prevalence of these disorders. So what do these words mean? An individual can exist in all the mental states listed at the same time. Most importantly, mental health is not a continuum. We all experience mental distress, but not all of us end up developing a mental disorder. Worldwide, 15 to 20% of the population will have mental illness. Youth with mental disorders or illness need rapid access to trained professionals for proper diagnosis and proven effective treatments. So to go over the definitions of each of these listed on the pyramid, number one is mental distress. It's everywhere and unavoidable. It is an inevitable part of life and can spur on developing life skills and build resiliency. For example, I backed my car into a concrete pole. It caused me to experience mental distress. Mental distress is a signal from our brain that we need to adapt to our environment, that there is a problem that we have to solve. When we solve the problem, the distress goes away, and we are left with a new skill that we can use to help us solve future problems. Mental distress is necessary for growth and development. We all have the ability to negate stress, and this is how we learn to problem solve and develop coping skills to manage in adulthood. Mental distress doesn't require medical intervention. Mental health problems is number two. These also arise in response to an environmental stressor, but one of significantly greater magnitude, such as loss of a loved one, loss of a job, immigration, etc. When we are faced with such a large stressor, our capacity to negate it may be overwhelmed for a time. This doesn't mean there's an illness. On the contrary, what we are experiencing is an expected response to a specific stressor. Mental problems are an indicator that we are having difficulties adapting to the environment and may need external help, like counseling or additional family or community support. A good example of a mental health problem is grief, a normal response to a significant change in a person's environment. Number three, mental illness or mental disorder caused by the perpetration in unusual brain function. It can often occur regardless of environmental factors, but is also often the result of complex interaction between the environment and genetic factors. There are evidence-based treatments recommended for various disorders or illnesses, just as there are for illnesses. You can be in all categories at the same time. For example, Sarah has ADHD. She is upset that her partner broke up with her. She's worried about her math exam, and she is also doing just fine. It is not a continuum, and you don't have to work your way up in order. Mental health cannot be defined by the absence of negative mood. Mental health is present in all states. Someone with a mental disorder may have better mental health than someone who doesn't have a mental disorder. Depression is used in an example to express the importance of clarity when using terms related to diagnosed illnesses. Using the right language for each of these states is essential. Remember that you don't have to move through the states in any order. They are a continuum. They are places to exist. Mental health state and type of action required how Type of action required how to explain health promotion and school-based mental health teaching and learning. System responses at each of these mental health categories are different. We can help build resilience and teach how most stress is positive and teach problem-solving skills that support the lower levels of the pyramid through health promotion. We can implement preventative measures to ensure a mental health problem doesn't escalate into a disorder. Mental disorder or illness requires informed school staff to make quality referrals in order to effectively support students in receiving effective interventions. These graphs show people that are diagnosed over their lifetime with various disorders. This shows the age of onset. Note, when we identify 50% of those that will be diagnosed, anxiety is around age 5, depression 12, substance abuse around 13. This S-curve or jump starts at different ages, typically during adolescent years. The age of onset mental illness is similar across the world. At about 70% of all mental disorders can be diagnosed prior to the age of 25 years. Reports suggest that mental disorders typically have early ages of onset, with estimated medians of 15 years for anxiety disorders, 26 years for mood disorders, and 21 years for substance use disorders. All three classes of disorders were positively related to a number of socioeconomic measures of disadvantage. Analysis of retrospective age of onset reports suggest that lifetime prevalences have increased in recent cohorts, but the increase was less for anxiety disorders than for mood or substance use disorder. Delays in seeking professional treatment were widespread, especially among early onset cases, and only a minority of people with prevailing disorders received any treatment. While these results are from 2000, more recent findings are the same as this. Adolescence is a period during which many mental disorders such as schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, depression, and anxiety disorders appear. 70% of all the disorders have an onset window between 12 and 25. This slide shows similar information as the previous slide, the age of onset, but is presented in a different way. The age range is a critical period of brain development. This is why we are passionate about sharing this information to teachers, students, and parents, and why mental health literacy curriculum is targeted for students at the grade 9 and 10 level. So I'd like you to look at the graph and see what you notice about it. Over the years, the prevalence of suicide by age groups is relatively consistent. In fact, if we put more years on the slide, the same line would repeat from 1950 until present. What do you notice about this slide? What is your theory as to why the data follows this pattern? So some things to notice: that suicide is more common in middle-aged than adolescent. Suicide is very rare under the age of 14. Most people that die by suicide have a confirmed or suspected mental illness, approximately 90%. The vast majority do not receive services for their illness. The suicide rate has fallen during the 10-year period between 1995 and 2005. What is your perception or messaging that you're getting from the media? It is good to say that we have never been able to predict where this line goes. There are too many confounding variables to state what causes the fluctuation. Simplistic answers such as the economy or social funding or bullying does not address the complex dynamics of suicide. And in industrial nations where the suicide rate is under 18 to 100,000, as it is in Canada, the number one risk factors is the presence of a mental illness. In populations that have higher rates, there are typically social or cultural factors at play. So, who is in your classroom? This slide is used to give you an idea of how prevalence rates translate into the classroom. This is an average junior high school or high school classroom of approximately 30 students. This isn't a specialized classroom or a vocational school where statistics would show higher rates. This data reflects the prevalence of mental disorders within a regular learning environment. Remember that rates in elementary students would be lower due to the age of onset for mental illnesses beginning in adolescence. We don't know the specific reasons as to why any one person gets a mental disorder, but we do know that it is a complex interplay between genes and the environment. It is always both factors. There are sensitive periods during our development, prenatal and early childhood and adolescence, in which these different factors may play different roles. Examples may be maternal alcohol abuse while in utero may lead to FASD. A head injury in adolescence may lead to depression. Researchers are learning about epigenetics, meaning above around genes, to better understand the cause of mental illnesses and disorders. Epigenetics means that the environment can shape how our genes are expressed. For example, good food or good sleep may influence genes to turn on or turn off, thus affecting how they make proteins, which then may impact different aspects of human emotions, cognitions, and behavior. In some cases, these impacts may leave markers on our genes, which may be passed on to the next generation. This can be positive or negative effects, and they can be demonstrated in studies with rats and mice to echo or continue into future generations. Not every environmental impact is echoed in future generations, and much work remains to be done to understand this process fully. Therefore, it is important to understand that this impact may occur, but it is not useful to identify any current situation and assume that this impact did occur. For example, because a student becomes depressed, it does not mean that depression is a result of some past historical event. Some people may have some signs or symptoms without a full disorder, mental health problems. For example, sadness without clinical depression, while others may develop a full-blown illness. All symptom expression happens in a culture that can influence the impact or outcomes or even the types of commonly expressed symptoms themselves. Examples may be of youth being identified with ADHD in a traditional classroom setting by a youth who has the same symptoms in a hunter-gathering setting may not be impacted. So some key takeaways. Most of psychiatric disorders, about 70%, can be diagnosed during the 12 to 25 years age range, following the onset of puberty. Generally, they affect about 20% of young people. Globally, these mental disorders contribute about 1/3 of the burden of disease, mortality, morbidity, more than HIV, AIDS, TB, respiratory disease, cardiovascular diseases, and war and violence combined. In Canada and the USA, most who need care do not receive it. The healthcare systems are not set up to meet the mental health care needs of young people. Early identification, diagnosis, and proper effective treatments have substantial positive effects. Recovery and prevention. Addressing mental disorders effectively requires participation of those who parent and those who work with young people, schools, civil society organizations, and health providers. While mental health has one of the biggest impacts on health and wellness in Canada, it receives a very small amount of funding compared to other illnesses. Most individuals who suffer from a mental illness have good outcomes with treatment. Like all chronic medical conditions, we do not have the capacity to cure the disorder. Rather, we manage symptoms and promote recovery. Early effective intervention and prevention helps improve outcomes similar to most other treatments in medicine. That concludes part one, and we will continue in the next recording.